Hey, fourth graders, Mr. Steinberg again. So some of you have already moved on to the unit where you're multiplying fractions. So I wanted to kind of show you some examples of how to kind of manipulate and use the unit fraction. So I have, I think, three examples. Remember, a unit fraction is any fraction where the numerator is 1. The denominator can be, as large or small as the problem shows or as you want, but the numerator has to be 1, so it's a unit fraction. So for example, if you look at all of our circular fractions here, how many parts are there total? Well, for each of them, right, each of them shows that we have 4 equal parts. This one has 4, this one has 4, this one has 4, this one has 4, and this one has 4. But if you notice in all of them, they only have one part that's shaded pink. So they all represent 1/4, right? They all represent 1/4, or 1 out of 4. And so the question is asking you what multiplication problem is shown below. Well, if you think about it, if you go back to learning how to multiply, remember multiplication is the same thing as repeated addition. So if you wanted to, you didn't even have to multiply. You could just add these together. Just add them up. So you got 1/4 plus 1/4 plus another fourth, and another fourth. Remember, when you're adding fractions, if you're adding fourths, you're adding fourths, so you don't change the denominator. We don't add the denominators, but you can add the numerators. You just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have 5/4. That means you have 5 of these pieces. Each circle represents one of them, so you have 5 of them total. But then remember, you can also go the other way. If you wanted a shortcut, you can multiply. So you just count how many of these fraction circles do we start with, right? You have 1 circle, 2 circles, 3 circles, 4 circles, and 5 circles. We've got 5. And in each circle, how many of them are shaded pink? Well, in each circle, only 1/4, or 1 out of 4. Remember, 1 out of 4, that's a unit fraction because there's a 1 in the numerator. So you have 5 circles, or 5 fractions, and each of them show 1/4. So how do you multiply that? Well, one thing we need to remember about whole numbers, let me make a better circle. When you have a whole number, whole numbers are you're able to rewrite a whole number as a fraction, because remember, if you divide any number by 1, that number doesn't change, right? So if you, let's say you divide 3 divided by 1, well, it's still 3. 4 divided by 1 is still 4, and well, 5 divided by 1 is still 5. It hasn't changed, but you can just write it as a fraction so that you know when you multiply, you can multiply the numbers on top, 5 times 1, and then the numbers on the bottom, 1 times 4. And you'll notice that 5 over 4 is the same thing as 5 over 4. So the multiplication problem shown here is you have 5 fraction circles, right? 5 of these groups, and each one shows 1/4 shaded pink. So you multiply 5 times 1/4. You rewrite 5 as 5 divided by 1, or 5 over 1. Multiply 5 times 1, 1 times 4, and um, you found your multiplication problem. So here's another example. Here's something else that you might see. It says, looking at the number line, what multiplication problem do you see? So I'm going to put a mark here. Let's do something bright. Let's say 6 out of 8, right? So you can see I put a little mark at 6 over 8. So what we have to do is we have to remember exactly what would our unit fraction be, right? So if you look at the denominator, right, all of the denominators for all of these fractions is an 8, because this is broken up into 8 equal parts from 0 to 1. So you have 8 equal parts. So if your denominator is an 8, then your unit fraction, right, each one of them represents 1 out of 8. That's 1 out of 8, right? And that's another 1 out of 8, and then another, and then finally another until we get to that one. So what did we notice about that? We know that our unit fraction, right? This is our unit fraction. Here's our unit fraction right there. And how many of those unit fractions did we actually count till we got to the red mark? Well, let's count them again. We went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So what do we have? We have 1/8, our unit fraction, times 6. Or you could rewrite it as 6 times 1/8. And then from there, what if you wanted to solve it, what you could do is you could rewrite it. Remember, you can write any whole number. You can rewrite it as a fraction. Because remember, any whole number except for 0, any whole number divided by 1 is still that whole number. I guess it would work for 0 also. 0 divided by 1 would still be 0. But 6 divided by 1 is still 6. Then you just multiply it times your unit fraction, and you multiply the numbers on top, 6 times 1, the numbers on the bottom, 1 times 8, and there you go. We have 6/8, which is exactly where we wanted to end up. So if you look at a question like this, the unit fraction is 1/8 because each of these is broken into an eighth all the way down until you get to 1, which is the same thing as 8/8. And how many of those did we count starting at 0 till we got to the red mark? We counted 6 of them, right? So we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that's 6 out of 8. So you multiplied the unit fraction times the whole number, which was 6, and you got 6/8. All right, let's take a look at one more. This one's a little bit more challenging. And this will be the last one for this video, I promise. I know I'm already talking too much, but so here we have a word problem. It says that Mr. Steinberg reads 1/5 chapter of his math book each night. He has 3 1/5 chapters left to read. How many nights will it take Mr. Steinberg to finish the book? Well, let's find out. Where are we starting? So I start here. I read 1/5 of my math book each night. So let's see, how many days will it take until I reach by the rest of my book, which is 3 1/5 chapters left. So we count. So there's 1 night, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5. So think about what just happened. We know that the denominator is 5 because it's 1/5 of a chapter. Well, if each chapter has 5 equal parts, I just counted 5. I counted 1/5, and then a second fifth, then a third fifth, a fourth fifth, and finally a fifth, another one, a 5 out of 5. So that represents 1. That's 1 whole. We have to keep that in mind for when we think about this number here. Okay, so I've read so far I've read 5/5. So let's read another one. There's 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. That's 10 nights. Okay, so I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I did 6, and then I did a 7th fifth, and then an 8th fifth, a 9th fifth, and then a 10th fifth. Well, what do you notice about 10/5? Well, that's the same thing as 2, right? That's the same thing as 2 whole. So this is 1 whole, that's 2 wholes. And then here, I do an 11th fifth, a 12th, a 13th night, a 14th night, finally a 15th night. So there's 11 out of 5. Oh, sorry, 11 fifths, 12 fifths, 13 fifths, 14 fifths. Oops. Sorry. That always happens when I write the number 4. And finally, 15 fifths. Well, 15 divided by 5, well, that's the same thing as 3. So it says, how many nights will it take Mr. Steinberg to finish the book? Well, if you count the number of fifths that I traveled or the nights that I read, it took me 15 nights. So I started with 1/5, and it took me 15 nights to get all the way to 3 1/5. All right, let me circle that. It took me 15 nights to get there. So we'll say 15 nights. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. And all we did was we just counted by unit fractions, right? We counted one at a time. We counted 1/5 all the way down until we finally reached 3 1/5. And it took us 15 times, 15 unit fractions to get there. And you could use multiplication to check that. If you take 15 nights times 1/5, what does that equal? Well, that's 15 over 1, because 15 divided by 1 is 15. Multiply it times 1/5, and you get 15 over 5, 15 nights. And then if you divide 15 divided by 5, well, that's 3. That's the same thing like we got up here. So 15 over 5 is the same thing as 3 wholes, or just 3. But in the end, it took me 15 times just to get to 3 1/5. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. I'm going to stop it here, but if you have any questions about working with unit fractions, just reach out to your homeroom teacher. Thank you.